will ask you, Chrystia, Minister Freeland, to keep your remarks as tight as you can, and then we will go to questions. And I believe you are here for an hour, so the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Chair. And let me just quickly thank the fine public servants who are here with me. I'm accompanied by Andrew Marsland, who is the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Tax Policy Branch, by Nick Lezick, who's the Assistant Deputy Minister, Economic and Fiscal Policy Branch, by Evelyn Dancy of the Economic Development and Corporate Finance Branch, by Soren Halverson, Financial Sector Policy Branch, and by Catherine Rekiko of International Trade and Finance Branch. So we have brought a full court press. I'll just make some opening remarks, then I'm happy to answer your questions. La protection de la santé et de la sécurité des Canadiens demeure la priorité du gouvernement. Comme vous le savez, j'ai dévoilé la semaine dernière.
As you know, last week I gave an economic statement for the fall of 2020, support Canadians and fighting poverty and fighting COVID-19.
Minister, can you check if you're on the at the bottom of your screen there, if you're on the language you're speaking?
Wait.
That way. Okay.
And one more question has Mr.
Sorry about that.
arrived?
Okay.
I don't see him.
I believe he's in the waiting room.
La deuxième vague de la pandémie est agressive. L'hiver sera difficile, mais on peut être.
The second wave of the pandemic is upon us. We know that the challenges are significant, but we do have a plan to deal with the coming months and restart our.
Another point of order. Sorry, I mentioned as the minister was beginning again that Mr. Poilievre was in the waiting room. Is there somebody able to let him in?
Yes, they will be. They will be looking after that. We had quorum, so we started. Minister, the floor is yours.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, the member is, if the member is unable to attend the meeting, this may actually even be as strong as a matter of his privilege to attend this meeting. So I wonder if we can please ensure that Mr. Poilievre is permitted to join the meeting. It is his privilege as an MP to be able to attend this meeting.
Well, if he's had technical issues, I would agree. But I do know that Mr. Poilievre always comes in the last seconds. There he is now, so we'll wait for him.
He had been waiting for some time, according to the message I've got here. So
all right, Mr. Do you want to do a sound test, Pierre, before the minister continues?
Yes, sorry. Testing, 1, 2, 3. I think there was a problem in the waiting room there. But I'm with you now, Wayne. I know you were worried I wouldn't be here.
I know you're waiting patiently. Back to you then. The minister has just started and introduced the senior officials from the department, so just started the remarks, Pierre, so you didn't miss a thing. Madam Minister.
Excellent.
Okay. The fall economic statement details our plan to protect Canadian lives, Canadian jobs, and Canadian businesses, and we are moving quickly to deliver on our commitments. The legislation I tabled last week, Bill C-14, proposes to move forward with several urgent COVID-19 related measures in the fall economic statement that will help Canadians get through this pandemic and strengthen our health response. For example, the legislation would provide low and middle income families who are entitled to the Canada Child Benefit with additional support of up to $1,200 for each child under the age of 6 in 2021. It would also help young Canadians by eliminating, for 1 year, the interest on their repayment of the federal portion of the Canada Student Loan and Canada Apprentice Loans. I'm just going to change my language now. It would also, le projet de loi.
The bill also provides funding of $505.7 million in 2021 to support long-term care homes in order to prevent any further expansion of COVID-19. The bill would also provide $400 million, additional $400 million for a variety of measures, including in the area of public health, mental health, the fight against addiction, and for more testing, as well as telemedicine.
I hope all members will consider this legislation with the urgency it deserves. I know that we all know Canadians are counting on us. Mr. Chair, last week's fall economic statement also outlined a growth plan to jumpstart Canada's economy once the coronavirus is under control. Le gouvernement investira.
The government will invest between 3 to 4% of the government's GDP over a period of 3 years. The government will define this plan further over the coming months in anticipation of the 2021 budget. The plan will be provided to create good jobs for the middle class.
This, Mr. Chair, is needed economic policy, and this is smart economic policy. One of the lessons of the 2008-2009 global financial crisis is that withdrawing fiscal support too soon after a deep downturn can hamper growth for years afterwards. Our government will not repeat that mistake. That said, our stimulus, our growth plan, will be time limited and carefully targeted. Fiscal guardrails will help us establish when the stimulus will be wound down. When the economy has recovered, time-limited measures will be withdrawn, and Canada will resume its prudent and responsible fiscal path. Uncertainties about the timing of the pandemic and global economic developments mean that the timeline for recovery should not be locked into a rigid, predetermined calendar. Instead, the government will track progress against several related indicators, recognizing that no one data point is a perfect representation of the health of the economy. These indicators include the employment rate, total hours worked, and the level of unemployment in the economy. Mr. Chair, I'm very glad the committee is beginning its consultations. The federal government will launch our own pre-budget consultations in the new year. We all very much look forward to hearing from Canadians about their priorities as we design our growth plan.
I'm looking forward to hearing Canadians' ideas on what we can do to support Canadian families and businesses, restart our economy, and maintain Canada's strong budgetary position.
We Canadians have faced adversity in the past. We've faced tough winters, and we have always emerged stronger than before. I know that we will this time too. I would be pleased now to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. And I assume the speaking list for the Conservatives is Poilievre first. If I'm wrong, you'll have to correct me, Mr. Poilievre, and we'll go to a 6-minute round. And Madam Minister, like the night of the estimates in the House, we're following COVID-19 rules during this session, so try and keep your answers as close as possible to the time that they took for the questions. Mr. Poilievre, floor is yours.
Yes, with the government printing money to pay its bills, the cost of living is rising. Carbon taxes and other taxes are only adding to the problem. Groceries will go up by $700 per family. With these higher costs and rocketing unemployment, why is the Minister of Finance proposing to raise taxes, carbon taxes, liquor taxes, and payroll taxes right at a time when Canadians can least afford to pay?
Madam Minister.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Speaker. Let me point out that the jobs recovery in Canada, while incomplete, has actually been strong. 80% of the jobs lost in the depth of the coronavirus recession have recovered, and that compares to just around 60 in the United States. So Canadians are going back to work, and I congratulate them. On the tax front, Mr. Speaker, let me also point out that we have frozen the level of EI contributions, very much in recognition of the fact that the Canadian economy needs support. And
I'll
when
have
it
to go
comes
back
to groceries,
Mr. Poilievre.
okay.
Will the minister commit to freezing all tax increases rather than raising them on January 1st? Yes or no?
Thank you very much for the question. Let me just say, when it comes to groceries, one of the reasons that I singled out in my opening remarks the Canada Child Benefit is because we are very aware of the additional support
Mr.
that some
Poilievre.
families need.
The question is very simple. Will the government freeze taxes on January 1st, or will they raise them? Yes or no?
Madam Minister.
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. As you know, we have announced some additional taxes to level the playing field. For example, the introduction of GST, HST on all internet providers. I think that's fair for Canadian companies.
I have to go back to Mr. Poilievre.
Will the minister, yes or no, freeze the carbon tax, the payroll tax, and the liquor tax rather than fleecing Canadians? Yes or no?
Madam Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think that it is quite wrong to use the term fleecing Canadians when it comes to the taxes that we pay to contribute to our society and to our communities. As the member knows, we did announce the introduction of GST,
point of order,
HST.
Mr. Poilievre. Mr.
Point of order.
Okay. Point of order.
Yes, I'm just concerned that the answers are getting longer and longer. And I wonder, you've done a great job setting the precedent. I wonder if the minister could continue to match.
I don't believe that's well, I guess it's the point of order. I'm trying to keep them relatively the same. We're back to Mr. Poilievre.
So very directly, will the minister raise carbon taxes, payroll taxes, and liquor taxes right in the middle of a pandemic? Yes or no?
Madam Minister.
Mr. Chair, we said what we had to say about tax policy in the fall economic statement. We committed to introducing taxes on vacant property owned by foreign residents.
So no answer to that question after 5 attempts. Maybe we'll have better luck here. How much is the minister proposing to raise the borrowing limit to?
Madam Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have outlined very carefully and I believe very prudently our plans on the borrowing limit. We believe that the prudent level is 1.8 trillion.
And that would bring us how close in debt to GDP numbers to the level we reached in the 90s when Canada almost defaulted on its debt? Just looking for the number.
Madam Minister.
Actually, Mr. Chair, it's an inexact question because we are not proposing to borrow that amount of money. We are simply proposing to raise the limit because that's the prudent thing to do.
Well, if you're not proposing to borrow that amount, you don't need the authority to do so.
Madam Minister.
Mr. Chair, actually, that's not the case at all. A prudent government always creates buffers and creates fiscal space. But there is, as the member knows, a very clear difference between borrowing authority and the amount the government has actually borrowed.
Mr. Poilievre.
Well, this is the biggest increase in borrowing authority ever sought by any government in Canadian history. It's a monstrous increase to $1.8 trillion. Why should Parliament give the government that authority if the government claims it doesn't even need it?
Madam Minister.
Mr. Chair, I did not say that the government didn't need the borrowing authority. What I said quite clearly is there is a clear difference between borrowing authority and the amount the government actually borrows. As for supporting this legislation or not, that's up to each member of the House to vote as they choose. I believe this is a prudent path that will support Canadians.
Mr. Poilievre, last question.
All right. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, will the minister tell us, is there anyone to whom the Bank of Canada is accountable for all of the money it's printing? Is there anyone, any officer, any minister, any human being to which the Bank of Canada is accountable? Yes or no?
Madam Minister.
Mr. Chair, the Bank of Canada is an independent institution. Its independence is one of the key reasons for the strength of the Canadian economy. I think the Bank of Canada is accountable to the people of Canada.
Okay, thank you both. Then we will go to Ms. Koutrakis, who's splitting time with Mr. MacLeod. Ms. Koutrakis.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Minister Freeland, as well, for your testimony today. Before I start, I would like to congratulate the Prime Minister for having put together a fantastic team at Finance Canada to guide us through the rest of this pandemic until the full recovery. Minister Freeland, Minister Fortier, le collègue Sean Fraser et Michael Sabia all have the experience and the competence that our government and that our country needs at this point. I'm convinced the Canadians are in good hands. Madam Minister, can you give us an idea of the principles that support the funding of $70 to $100 billion for this recovery?
Madam Minister.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll start by thanking my colleague for her hard work. We all know that, yes, the government and Canadians are doing a great deal in order to have a resilient economy and in order to do well, even in the context of a fight against a pandemic. But we are also well aware of the fact that despite all of our work, the pandemic has created a recession, a coronavirus recession. I said at the outset that 80% of the jobs lost have already been recovered. That's 80% of jobs lost, and that's a good thing. That being said, there are 640 people before the pandemic who once had a million people who once, or people who did not have jobs before, or had jobs before the pandemic, who no longer have these jobs. We have to invest in the economy in order to have a strong, robust recovery. The most important target for us, I want to remind all members of Parliament, the most important target to us is jobs. I think the government has really, when we speak to Canadians, it is up to us to reassure Canadians and give them the confidence that this government will continue to work for them to make sure that each Canadian who had a job before the pandemic will still have a job at the end of this pandemic and after the pandemic. And that is the reason why we have announced a growth plan, as the member was saying, between $70 and $100 billion. It will be a pleasure to work with you, with your committee on this plan.
I will have to go to Mr. MacLeod. Sorry, Annie. Mr. MacLeod.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Minister for appearing for us. I have a couple quick questions. The first one is around housing. One of the greatest areas of concern in Northwest Territories, which has been made even clearer during the pandemic, is access to safe and affordable housing. My question is the government prepared to take further steps in budget 2021 to properly address the housing needs of Northerners? And the second question is around the issue I've heard from territorial and Indigenous and community governments, is that they're struggling to meet the cost sharing requirements of existing federal programs. And COVID has made it even harder. Is the government of Canada open to providing greater flexibility to ensure that very important projects for our regions are able to move forward and to proceed.
Madam Minister.
Thank you very much for the question. I'll start with the second, then move on to the first. And I do want to thank the deputy, I'm looking at you on the screen right now, for his hard work representing the North. I think we are all aware that the North faces particular challenges, always, but especially now when it comes to fighting the coronavirus. In terms of cost-sharing programs and government programs to support the North in the fight against the coronavirus, I'm really glad to be able to say that the Northwest Territories received $30.7 million to support a range of measures that the territories have put in place to protect Northerners. This includes critically the isolation centers, which are expensive, but have, and I will be interested in the members' point of view, but have been, I believe, a critical element in the defense of the Northwest Territories against the coronavirus. Overall, in the fall economic statement, we were able to say that the government has provided $272 million to Northern communities and businesses. And let me just say quickly on housing, that is a key area. It's something that we very much support and realize there is an acute need in the North. The coronavirus, which of course requires us to be able to have space, I think has drawn particular attention to the housing need and the housing gap in the North. And as the member knows, our government has also committed to a very strong program to support rental housing construction across the country. Thank you, Mr.
We
Chair.
will have to end it there. Thank you all. Turning into Mr. St. Marie, who will be followed by Mr. Julian, and in the second round by Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Fragiskatis. Mr. St. Marie.
Oui, merci, Wayne.
Thank you, Wayne. I'd like to start by thanking the Minister for her presence here at the committee. I'd like to also say welcome to all the members of her team who are here via video conference. My question for the Minister is as follows. Is she, the government, or her department currently working at a targeted program to support the aerospace industry? The short answer is absolutely yes. And I can give you more details. Yes, please do. Go ahead. Take the time that you need to do that. We are working on this type of program. We understand the absolute importance of aerospace in Canada